When you're done, just almost done. No, no need. You don't have to. You're welcome to. It doesn't. It will not. You will not be identified. After that. Okay. So thank you guys. So this is the first session, the actual real session, not the big lecture session that you guys all went to. This is the one where we're really kind of drilling down on some of the big picture ideas in global health, and that's on the idea of international development, which many will say that global health is kind of offshoot of that overall enterprise. We're going to get into that quite a bit during the session. So what we're going to do is, it's the first session, and I'm going to do a little bit of gerrymandering, forced gerrymandering. I like the diversity of this table. I see a number of PAs here, 4 school medicine students here, so let's do like an intercambio, maybe 1 or 2 from each come in and change around a little bit, whoever's willing to switch. And these are going to be your groups, at least for the foreseeable future. So we want to do some introductions. We'll set some ground rules. That won't take very hard because you guys are all experts on doing ground rules. We're going to talk a little bit about the concept of health. I know it seems like we shouldn't have to talk about that, but in global health, the idea of health actually takes on some different meanings than we typically think about. We're going to spend a long time. You're going to find that, especially in the big picture sessions, we spend some time going through history. We spend some time talking about events that led to the world that we live in now, in which there is a field of global health, which in many cases is rooted in diseases of poverty and disparity. And we're going to do that in a bit of a perspective from colonial history. We'll talk about the idea of development and how we measure it, and what are some of the things we use, what are some of the terms we use to describe development. And then this is the kind of the main area of competency that this course this class will help you with, which is to describe roles and relationships of the major entities that influence global health and development. So this is going to be a very easy, non-invasive, low-risk icebreaker introduction. It's not going to be divulging family secrets. It's not going to be divulging big, private things about yourself. This is just an idea so that both for you to remember each other and for me to start to try to remember you guys. What I want you to do in the next 5 minutes or so is introduce yourself to your group, your name, your program, your school, and you're going to designate a reporter, someone who's going to report to the entire class. And what we want is for each person within your group to tell something about yourself, something funny, something embarrassing, something interesting. And you guys are going to, whether you choose to do it autocratically or democratically, you're going to choose the best story, and the reporter is going to introduce everybody and then say what the story is, and then we all have to guess who that story is about. Okay? Does everybody understand the ground rules? Okay. So that's the ground rules. So why don't you take about 5-6 minutes to do that, and then we'll report back.
Yeah, I'm just calling my name. So I have That means I can raise my stack probably about back. So I do it through this year. It's pretty big. So someone going up, and they're like, oh. It's so funny. But yeah, so that's not going to be confusing. Obviously, I went to school, but I did my undergraduate at Kansas State University. So we're starting at nice. That's actually. I never thought. This way that one person knows. Yeah. Who wants to do it? So y'all yeah. I can. Yeah. I can do it. No, it's the ones that they're saying. So you're interested in string agent, pick one and they have to. Oh, we have to choose the best story. Yay! Yay! Yes! Yeah, absolutely. Born and raised. You're on the wrong side of the room. 2012. Okay.
2 minutes.
You like specifically wanted to say one. You're like, this apartment. I know the layout. I think that's everybody's looking at me.
Okay. Are we ready? Are we ready? No, we're not ready? We need 1 more minute? Okay, 1 more minute then. Let's come together. Let's do it. All right. Let us.
Oh, wait, we just got 2 new members.
Did you get 2 new members? I think I'm going to transplant one of your new members. Wait, are you guys 5 or 6? 5's okay. I will accept 5. Okay. Well, you guys get the benefit. You guys are going to have to actually introduce yourselves and say something embarrassing about yourselves. That's going to be the late charge. So you have to get up and introduce yourself personally. Okay. So let's start with you guys. Go ahead and who's your rapporteur?
This is Lavinia. Lavinia is in the School of Medicine. She went to Texas Tech. Spencer also from the School of Medicine, went to the University of North Texas. And then so Mark is in the physician assistant program. He also went to Texas Tech. And within our group, one of our members did research in Peru this summer.
I
You guys got a guess?
guess 10.
You guess Tim? Huh?
Not me.
Not him. So? Mark?
Yes.
Mark? Oh, come on. Man. Is it Spencer? Media? Who is it? 50-50. Yeah? What did you do,
As
Spencer?
part of this program, I highly recommend to
Yeah. Good. Okay, guys. Who's the rapporteur?
Almost. Alright, so we have Annie, who went to UT and is in the PA program, and Sarai, who went to Concordia, who is in the PA program, Elizabeth, who went to Baylor and is in the OT program. Taylor, who went to A&M, who's in the PA program, and Lauren, who went to LMU in California, who's in the OT program. And one of us has gone fishing every year of our life and has never one time caught fish.
Who is the unlucky fisherman? Fisher person.
Fisherwoman. Fisherwoman in that day. Fisherwoman.
Who is it? No guesses?
It was not me. That's not my story. I apologize. I do catch it.
Oh, So who is it, guys? Someone's got to pick right. Huh?
It is.
Oh, man. Where do you go fishing?
California.
Okay, we're going to avoid that.
Yeah, every lake in California that you can never go to, every river, anywhere. And my friends are like pro fishermen, so.
Someone caught them all before you
You
got
want to
there.
go deep sea fishing?
Someone caught them all before you got
Right.
there. All right, guys. Let's hear from this table. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sam. I'm in the PT program. I went to Texas State, San Marcos. This is also Sam. He is School of Medicine. He went to Baylor. Yeah, there you go. This is Ben. He's also in the School of Medicine, and he went to a school in Odessa. It's called UT Bermuda. This is Maria. She's School of Medicine, and she went to the Rio Grande Valley. UT Rio Grande. And this is Sarah. She is also in the School of Medicine, and she went to So Dan.
All right.
Um,
What's your
so
factoid?
for our story, this person in a freak accident in Take Your Child to Work Day was placed in a highly classified stealth bomber and then decided to eat a piece of it.
What?
So this person has been not only in a highly classified stealth bomber, but he has eaten it.
Oh, there we go. Now we got.
Or she.
Or she.
Ben. Sam.
Come on, guys, try again.
Gotta watch those pronouns.
Yeah. I was doing so well. So I had to rephrase it.
It was the 90s that put kids in concerts.
Yeah, it's a thing you do.
I was like 3 months old.
All right. Let's hear from the left upper quadrant.
So mine is very long, but actually, Daniel, I'm school medicine. Daniel, Mary's in the MT school. Martin's in the PA school. Tasha's also in the PA school. Leslie's in the PA school. Stay on here, sophomore. So somebody in our group got a little too excited with the intersections recently. Got a little bit
I'm guessing more.
You're saying the section
Yeah.
of pieces on the hands. On the raw hand or on the gloved hand?
But hopefully good.
It was gloved. I didn't know that it was gloved, but it wasn't.
Natasha.
Okay.
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of cheated on that one because that's not a story that goes unnoticed. So like all the PT students are like, oh my gosh, what happened? So I knew it was a PA kid.
Okay, Leslie, you have to give us your embarrassing factoid. Not embarrassing, interesting.
Interesting. Embarrassing in a way too. I used to have an iguana, and I would make like little pills for it. Didn't wear them. He didn't like it.
He ate them.
Great.
Awesome. Well, good work, guys. Good work. So now I think we've introduced ourselves. Oh, I'm Matt Dasho, and I'm in school of medicine. And I actually went here for medical school. So there's that. I guess I don't know if there's an interesting factoid about me. I play the saxophone, and I have 3 albums. Yeah, available on iTunes, but that's conflict of interest, so I can't talk about it. So we're going to have some ground rules. These are just the baseline stuff. If you do any small group work, we're going to just ask that we don't interrupt each other. Please let others finish speaking. We mentioned this in the introduction, but this is a course where we really want it to be a safe space for you to share your thoughts, share your opinions. You may have heated disagreements. The topics we're going to go through are very, very acute. All right, there's stuff in the news about the stuff that we talk about almost every day, if not every week. And so please be respectful and mindful of others' opinions that may not share your perspective. And just, this is a place of learning, right? So we're going to learn from each other. And the best way to do that is in a way that acknowledges that we're all different, we come from different backgrounds, and we all have legitimacy of perspective. So that's how we're going to learn. Want you to participate in discussions. If I see that you're silent, Bob, I'm going to pick on you. I'm going to start calling on you personally. All right, so we want everybody to participate in discussions. Be open to new ideas. Open-mindedness is key for global health. If you go into places, and we're going to pick on Spencer because he's gone down somewhere, you're going to go in with opinions about how things are, and you're going to be challenged, right? And so we want you to be open to new ideas, new ways of thinking about things. And definitely ask questions. This is a field that's constantly evolving. New information is It's coming into our inboxes every day. So ask questions, get engaged. That's what we want. Hey, are we okay with these ground rules? Is that acceptable? I didn't want to go through the extras making you guys do it. I think you guys would agree with these. Good. So I want you to meet Fernando. This is Fernando. You are going to come to know and love Fernando over the next 8 months. Fernando is a brand new, spanking new baby boy, born to 2 happy parents in the city, or in the country of GHICC, which is a fictional republic in South America. He's born there in this house, and his parents are like looking over him and just cooing and saying, wow, look at this kid. It's just an amazing kid. So they're really excited to start a new life with their son, but they start to think about the future. They look forward, and they think about how their son's future is going to look. And they want to know how they can make it as bright as possible for him. They want to know whatever they can do, what needs to be there. So the question is, I have a few minutes here for you to work on this together. What do you think this kid needs in order to realize his potential as a human being? Very broad, very general, right? But think about the things that people need in order to achieve their full potential. All right? Take a few minutes, write down as many as you can. We're going to ask you for the top 3. All right?
On this paper.
No, not on that paper. Oh, you can write them down on a piece of note card paper if you guys. Are there anybody out of note cards? Anybody need note cards?
I know, right? That always helps. Oh, I didn't know I had randomly. Like, seriously. I get the keys. I know you're like baseline. Do you think this children are children from Mexico is just like completely poverty? There's like a 50-50 chance that this child has a problem with it. Just my work. I think we nailed it. Good job. That's how you realize your potential.
One more minute. Done. People figured it out. Meaning of life, the secret of the universe.
Never use the word what you do, your person is smarter
Okay, let's come together. So let's start, since we picked on you guys first last time, we're going to pick on you guys first this time. All right, so give me your top 3 things that this kiddo needs to achieve his full potential.
Opportunities to be able to.
What do you mean by that?
Maybe
You need education.
opportunities to learn, opportunities to experience.
Okay. You one more.
Sorry.
Love and support.
Love and support. Love, love, love. He needs opportunities, education, love, and support. Huh?
We did a different order.
Okay. That's all? That's all we
We
need?
said support system. Well, we ranked them 1, 2, 3. But basic needs.
What else?
You said we
What'd you say?
support system, opportunity, education.
Okay. What else?
We were
Huh?
simplifying.
Okay. We'll go even more basic.
Oxygen.
We need oxygen. Okay.
Definitely needs oxygen. I second that.
All right. Well, what gives you oxygen? Okay. I'll take it. That'll be my extra one for you. So we'll say that the environment should be cared for, right? Okay. What about you guys?
Alright, so we had 3 E's. One of them is already up there. Essentials, education, and exposure. So when we say essentials, we're talking just food, water.
Okay, so Maslow's hierarchy of
Very
needs.
base,
Right.
right?
Okay.
Very baseline
Essential
needs there.
Food, water, shelter. So if this guy eats nachos every day, drinks dirty water, and lives in a tin under like a tin roof with 9 of his siblings.
I mean, you can still realize the potential.
That's
Full potential?
Abraham Lincoln red light candlelight. This kid can make it.
Nachos are
I think we're starting with not just
Let's just say we're playing. Let's say we're playing the game of probability,
Fair enough.
and we're going with not the exceptions but the rules.
I feel really happy.
So when you say food, what do you mean by food?
Adequate nutrition.
So nutrition should be nutritious food, right? I mean, nutrition, nutritious food, and that is both macro and micronutrients, right? You can have a ton of potatoes, but then you get B12 deficiency, right? So you're not gonna live the most potential, the highest potential, if you're sitting there, developmentally delayed because you're not getting any B12, right? And then water. What about the water? It should be clean, right? So what does it take for the water to be clean? So some kind of infrastructure to clean water, right? Now that doesn't take tons of. What does it take to clean water?
Depends on the source.
Okay, let's say it's a river.
Charcoal filter and fire.
Yeah, you can do a charcoal filter. There are sand filters. Chlorine can sterilize water, right? Or the fancy stuff, which is what we end up using, which is water purification, right? So good. So clean water, and then shelter. What about the shelter?
Dry.
Huh?
Needs to be dry.
Should be somehow dry, right? But also secure.
Yeah.
should have some sort of insulation.
And light.
This is all good. So electricity. All right, now you start to add cost here. Okay, so
Not necessarily.
not necessarily. I know Abraham Lincoln is like, no, he didn't have electricity.
I'm
Okay,
telling you.
full possibilities that optimize this kid's ability to not like everybody can bootstrap. I'm talking like the things that need to be there so this kid has the highest probability, right? So we'll say I'm gonna just group that under some kind of structure. So, what about you guys?
We originally had nutrition, but stability.
Tell me about that.
I think what we were doing there was for like resources.
Okay.
Oftentimes health is dependent on resources.
So stability of resources, like what kind of resources? Like natural resources or?
Also, like political stability. You can't reach your potential if you're worried about.
Yes. I hate to say it, it's just terrible to say, but what do you need for political stability?
Either rule of law or a strong man keeping it.
Okay. All right. So somehow you need rule of law, right? There needs to be stability in society somehow, right? We all are far too familiar with conflict zones in the news, right? And those are not stable places. Those are not places where people are able to achieve their full potential. Many of you are here because you want to go serve those people. But you have to dig down and say, well, what's going on? Well, example, there's instability in this country, either because of war, because of famine, because of corruption, because of politics, whatever. So political stability implies that there's governance, right? There's some system of governance, right? People don't just live out, in most places, they don't just live out without a governance system, right? At some point, those people will not be able to achieve their full potential, right? Because governance, good government, can provide things that markets and individuals cannot, right? Okay, good. What else?
We had grit, like willpower.
Huh?
Willpower.
So I'm going to kind of put that, I like love and support. That's sort of from the outside, and then willpower is kind of from the inside, right? Yeah. All right. I want to give that a different term, which is self-efficacy. That's the idea that you are worth something in the world, and that you are endowed with the ability to do the things you want to do just because you have the wherewithal to make it happen. So it's kind of another, it's like the social sciencey way of saying will, right? So we're going to call that self-efficacy. Super important. Very hard to measure. Okay, good. So we've talked about security, which means rule of law. So for rule of law, you need some kind of police force. You need some kind of possibly a militia or military, right? And all of those things take what? Money. Money. You don't be afraid. Finances, economy. There has to be an economy. For there to be opportunities, there has to be an economy. For there to be education, there has to be an economy. For there to be any kind of infrastructure to support these things, there has to be an economy, because that has to pay for it, right? Somehow there has to be an economy. Good. Another big thing missing from here. Big. We're all into. He's got to be healthy, right? Should he be healthy? Everybody was like going. Everybody thought someone else was going to talk about it, right? So health, right? So what kind of health do we need? What does this kid need as far as health? Huh? Okay. So immunizations. What kind of health is that? Yeah, primary or preventive care. So preventive care, there's like preventive and curative, or primary, secondary, tertiary, whatever you want to call it. There's preventive stuff like vaccinations, cleaning the water supply, making sure people don't obey the rules and don't roll through the stop signs and hit you on the way to school, right? And then there's the secondary stuff, like you get sick and there's adequate facilities to take care of you, right? And we would like that. That would be the ideal, is that there's some infrastructure for health services. But as we're going to discuss in a second, health isn't just about services, even though we lament that as people who are going into sort of health service provision. Anybody want to add anything to this list? That's a good list. Would you guys agree? Good. So what's health? What is health? We're all in the health professions. We read about health care. What the health are we talking about? Opposite of custom. So,
Well-being.
huh?
A state of well-being.
State of well-being. All right.
Yeah.
No, it is a state of well-being. What kind of states of well-being are there? Mental, spiritual, emotional, physical. Awesome. So, the WHO defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease or infirmity. Just because I treated your pneumonia doesn't mean that you're not going to go home and still be unhealthy. And now you're cured of all ills, right? Something sticks out to me in this definition every time. It's this word, complete. Who here feels like, based on this definition, you are healthy? Who's healthy? How many of you guys have a test on Friday? Okay. So how's the mental health? Okay, so after that After that test, you're gonna probably go and destroy parts of your body. Most of those that have been involved in metabolizing 2 carbon fragments.
It's like you know me.
Are you going to be in good physical health that day? No. So the point of this is that health is this is an aspirational definition, right? This is something we work towards, right? It's like the limit as it approaches 0. If you can like bust out like a calculus and everything, right? So it is not that anybody can achieve. We can't promise that anybody is going to achieve a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being and not merely absence of infirmity. We work towards that. And the same thing goes for global health, and the same thing goes for development. So there are definition makers who think about global health, and they think about how it's defined. You guys are all here because you joined the global health track, and you took the global health interprofessional core course, and so you should know what that means, what you have agreed to take on. All right. So the official global health definitions deal with really 3 big areas. One is individual level health status. All right. So the health status of the individual. What are the things that are within your own body that make you sick or help you heal? Then there's the population level things. These are the things that are outside of the individual. These are community things. These are other factors that influence health that are in the community. The water supply, many of these things you guys mentioned, all influence health. Then there's the even more meta look at health, which is that it's multidisciplinary root cause analysis of ill health. So it's not just about the factors in primary or secondary care, it's social, cultural, economic, scientific advancements, these other disciplines that come together to study problems of health that are outside of typical health fields. So policy level things at meta level, community level things at individual level. So that is global health. So do we have to go to Africa to do that? To do global health? No. In fact, global health starts at our front doorstep, right? So you can do many of the things that you will learn throughout this course can be applied either to work in settings that are outside of the country or even in settings here. They can be applied to the rich or to the poor. This is a way of thinking, right? So it's trying to like break out of the traditional mold of how we teach about healthcare and health professions and just think about it as these things. We call it a political economy approach because we are looking at the political, the social, cultural, and the economic context in which illnesses arise. And most importantly, we're looking at how social structures, things like power, like class, like gender, influence the evolution of disease and the possibility that you may be prone to it. Okay, so that's the approach we want you guys to take. We want you to amplify the way you think about these things, and think especially about social structures. Think about power. Think about culture. Think about gender, class, all those things that really come to bear on the health of the community and then ultimately the health of the individual. So similarly, how many of you guys have heard someone say, oh, this is a developing country. We're going to a developing country. I'm from a developing country. What do they mean? What are they developing? Okay, so infrastructure, that's something we could look at, absolutely. So who's been to let's say what we would call a low resource country? Yeah. Did you see places that had a lot of resources? Like, did you see rich neighborhoods? Yeah. Did you see poor neighborhoods? So within that country, there was infrastructure, it just wasn't equally distributed, right? So I would agree with you. That's one of the things we look at, but you can even drill down, and in a country, you could say that some places are really developed. I lived in Africa, right? I lived in Botswana, and I drove a decent 1996 car, right? People stopped at the stoplights. All of the roads were paved. There was electricity pretty consistently. There were no guns. There was no violence. There was good, decent healthcare system. There was an education system. But it's still a developing country somehow, right? So what else besides infrastructure? When we say developing country. So the truth is, it's hard, isn't it? Right? It's hard to think of like what that means. Yeah.
Population growth.
Okay, that's another factor, right? Like we would say that in places where incomes are low, that sometimes there aren't that's like population growth interventions that typically constrain population growth. I agree with that. But that's a separate factor. That's a measurable factor that contributes to overall development, right? Would you say we live in a developed country? By and large, I think so. We live in a rich country. You know, are there places that we would call developing in our country? Places along the border, places, 10, 15 blocks away from here, right? So what we're really not talking about development, because the truth is that development implies that you can achieve some sort of status as developed. But the truth is, nobody really knows what it means. So generally, people who think about this stuff have thrown out developing country, like less developed or developing country or developed countries. Generally, we don't talk about that anymore. We talk about it in terms of the specific measurables. Any other measurables besides population growth you can think of that we would use? We might use? Huh? Income. So income per capita, right? Which we're going to get into a little bit later. Income is one of those things we can measure. And so we would divide countries by low income, low middle income, high income countries. And generally that correlates with the gestalt that we think about when we're thinking about development, right? Okay. Does that make sense? All right. Comments, thoughts, disagreements, agreements? Hurrah. Okay. So generally people like to think of development as like good change. It means that something is changing, right? And it's that you hope that it's evolving to where people can be in a place where they can achieve the full potential that they deserve because of being on this earth, right? So I like to, we think about things differently in the world now, isn't it? We think about things differently than our ancestors did. So I like to sum up about 500 years of history in 5 minutes. And so that means that I get to cherry pick the things that I talk about. But what my disclaimer is that the cherry picked things that I talk about are generally the cherry picked things that most people who study this stuff talk about. So these are seminal events in world history that shape the way that the world is today, and the reason for which you are needed to go into this field. Okay? Right? So generally people who think about development and development studies, they like to start with the colonial era, the age of discovery. This was the 15th, 17th centuries. We all took civics or world history in elementary or in high school. This was that period of the great explorers. Remember, they went out from Europe and they colonized the Americas and parts of Africa, mostly Spanish and Portuguese empires. We were actually a colony, right, during this time. Right? We became a colony of the British. And what we saw throughout the next couple of centuries was profound growth. Now, these explorers, I always like when we learn about them as explorers, right? They're Pizarro and Cortez and these guys that all have street names in Latin America named after them. These great explorers, and I'm a Trekkie, right? So I like to think of explorers like Captain Kirk or Jean-Luc Picard or those guys. Yeah, I'm a nerd, I know it, right? But I like to think about them because those guys were explorers, right? They wanted to explore for the sake of discovery. These guys, not as interested in discovery. What was their motivation? Generally, it was extraction, right? These were hungry, growing economies in Europe that needed raw materials, that needed labor, that needed resources. So they sent these guys out to find the promised land and to find these new resources and to extract raw materials and to build infrastructure in those countries, basically so that they could extract things like labor, resources, and minerals. And you saw a lot of growth, especially Southeast Asia and Africa and the Americas during that time. And most of these were public-private ventures. This wasn't someone waking up in the morning and saying, I think we're going to go colonize. These were businesses, the Dutch East India Company, the Dutch South Africa companies. These were companies based in Europe that were funding and financing these exploratory missions to go and invest and hopefully bring back the spoils of that investment, right? So this was not the great explorations that we typically think about. Hey, you. Then some things happened, right? Those populations of Europeans, they settled, they intermarried after conquest, of course. And after some period of time, they didn't really understand why they were having to send so many of their resources back to this place. They didn't understand, and it wasn't really their home. And so there was a lot of revolution that took place. We had our own revolution, of course, in the late 1700s. But if you track the history of the Americas and you track Latin American history, you will find that by the middle part of the 1800s, the vast majority of Latin American countries were now free, right, or independent, we'll say, of European rule. And it was generally violent, generally very bloody, and generally very divisive. But that impacted the empires of the British, the Spanish, and the Portuguese profoundly. So they went looking around for other places, right? Am I saying anything controversial? Right? This is kind of established historical stuff, right? So they went around looking for new resources, and many of them settled on Africa, because Africa was this beautiful, huge continent full of lush natural resources, populations that were robust and could work and all of this. So they went and they colonized all kinds of Latin America. There was a scramble, of Africa. There was a scramble. You saw the British in East Africa and Southern Africa creating the Union of South Africa. You had the Germans, some parts of Namibia. They had German East Africa. The Portuguese, Angola, and Mozambique, and so on. Even the Italians got into the game. They colonized Ethiopia. So everybody was in the Africa game because they realized they went there. They found populations that had not advanced the same technology. These were populations that, with European technology and mostly European diseases, they were able to quench and to suppress and to put to work and then ship around the world. So really terrible chapter in colonial history. But this is what happened in Africa. So then, anybody know who this guy is? Who's that guy? It's not Hitler. I know he's got the Hitler mustache and stuff. Who's that guy? Any guesses? Well, where's one foot? Where's his foot? South Africa. He's like in Cape Town. Where's his other foot? In Egypt, Cairo. So this guy is Cecil Rhodes, the Rhodes Scholarship, and Rhodes College, and Rhodes this, Rhodesia, right? Rhodesia, Northern and Southern Rhodesia, which was Zambia and Zimbabwe. So this guy was sort of the prototypical British colonial thinker. And this was a guy who believed in his heart of hearts that colonialism was in fact the solution to the problems that Africa faced. He said, these are uncivilized people. They live in the bush. They don't wear the clothes. They don't have a god, although they had many of them. They are clearly not civilized, and it's our job. It is our role on this earth to bring civilization to these populations. And it was fueled in some ways by religion, by sort of some of the churches that went and sort of started setting up missions all over Africa. But this was popular belief and popularly supported that this was a mission of the Empire of the British, was to bring civilization to the Africans. And so that's Cecil Rhodes. And his dream was to build a cable and a railway from Cape Town to Cairo. He wanted to do that, not so that the guys in South Africa, whenever they wanted, could hop on a train and get up and go to Naivasha or to the Masai Mara in Kenya for a holiday. No, this was really to facilitate extraction of resources, right, and to facilitate extraction of labor. This was a dream that was not achieved. So I want to talk a little. We're gonna talk a little bit about this. I'm gonna make you guys be colonial for a minute. Okay, I know it's hard to think about yourselves as part of this history, but put on if there was a hat, I would say a colonial hat, and I want you to think through this problem. Okay, so imagine you are a British or a Portuguese or a Spanish or a French or German colonial power, You have been asked to set up a colony in these places. So remember that the colonial period was a period of intense upheaval, both in terms of biology, social issues, and economics, right? So these were people arriving to foreign places, profound shifts in population, different use of natural resources, right? And so there was obviously going to be conflict. There was warfare, and there was social disruption that came with colonialism. So colonial people, when their people would get sick, they really, those colonial powers really thought they were doing the right thing by trying to rid disease from the place, right? To sterilize the place. So there was an outbreak of African sleeping sickness. Does anybody know what this little guy is? Tsetse fly. It's nasty, little bug eyes and stuff. It's estimated, this was about the mid-1800s, it's estimated, of course, not like records were well kept, but anywhere between 200,000 and 500,000 people died of African sleeping sickness over a 10-year period. Some of the things that happened because of all this disruption, social disruption, traditionally communities took care of their wildlife, they took care of their agriculture. Obviously with disruption that came with colonialism, some places got burned, some places got raised that didn't need to be. It just wasn't maintained in the same way. So forests grew and it fostered wildlife reservoirs for the tsetse flies. So these places that used to be taken care of were no longer really taken care of, also because of the migration problems. And so these tsetse flies found a nice place to live. And so what I want to know, and I'm going to make each of you be a different country, I want to know, you're the colonial guys. Your people are getting sick. Africans are getting sick. So what are you going to do? How are you going to fix the problem? Remember, in the mid-1800s. What are some ways that you could try to address this outbreak? Huh? Cut the forest. I think that's a great approach. You are going to be the British. Here you go. Take your British. Okay. Okay, what else? What else could we do? Remember, you're colonial. You're like distribute mosquito nets. So we weren't making mosquito nets. What else might we do? Huh? Okay, so you want to fumigate the forest. You're going to fumigate the forest. Okay, we can't fumigate. What else can we do? So these guys burned it, but you can go ahead. Oh, wait. You have the British, right? Okay. So they're burning it already.
Yeah.
What else can you do?
Yeah, they're getting rid of it. It's getting on.
No, they're getting rid of it. They're burning it. What else can we do? So instead of, who said, were you guys the ones who said spray? Yeah. Okay, so let's not say spray. Let's say you give them a medicine. You give them a medicine to try to eradicate it. And you isolate. What else?
Introduce a natural predator.
Ooh, I like that. If only we knew how to do that. So what else?
That's the science.
So what can we do with people besides isolate? Huh? Kill the people. One way that might happen because of some of these things.
Well, you already gave them isolate and what else?
So they gave medicines. Yeah.
So,
Who was going to cut down the trees? You guys. Yeah, British are cutting down the trees.
yeah, so.
Okay. How about one of you guys should control the movement of people? Okay? You're going to put them into camps. Control the movement of people. You guys are going to drain the swamps. And segregate, right? So take a couple minutes, all right, and you guys can read that together. Now, okay, so now what I want you to do, you guys have done, you are great colonizers. Good job. What I want you to do now is read this, and now I want you to flip it. Now you have been colonized. You are a person who is from Uganda, from East Africa, from West Africa, and these people are doing this to you. So what I want to know is, did it work? And what do you think some of the downstream consequences were of what they did? Okay? Think about how it affected you, your community, your family.
Around flying fest areas, control, transport, professionals. By soldiers. Yes. Well, they obviously manage the situation. That's right, especially if they're not smart enough to figure out mosquito nets. Infectious disease might be a little over that.
Yeah.
She had like wires. This is the 1900s. They had like, they were progressing to like public practice. This is post 1900. This isn't like 1200. This is like the 20th century medicine.
Yeah.
Can they just with a chance to get yourself in the go-to meeting? They can like
And also, I think the races
or they can talk this
do the activity, maybe
maybe social just like test it out.
Well, I don't know. Are you doing this?
me or them.
I was going to say, if I can see what this looks like and maybe I just did it on the screen. And I was just kind of skimming to see what I saw said this. But again, I didn't
It should be. This is the
why did I go? Yeah, let me do that.
Do you have it on?
I didn't.
All right, one more minute, guys.
They're within us. Yeah, but the thing about that is that quarantine is on one side like that. This is another situation. I'm talking like full on, like we go 2 miles outside of Houston, build like a big old camp surrounded by barbed wire. Like that's
What
what
exactly
we're talking
was this?
about.
All right, guys, let's come together.
Yeah, come on.
We're going to change it up a little bit. We're going to start from up here. Patients right up the quadrant. Why don't you guys, someone stand up and tell us who you are and what was done to you, and whether there were what the effects were on you, your communities, work, didn't work, so on.
Us a large part of Africa, and we found that there was a small part of their fire the island is 52 square miles, and they imported 600 workers from Angola.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, you guys are Portuguese? Oh, I got to do you last. Okay, sorry. We got to start with British. Where are you guys? Sorry. Forget what she said. Okay. British. Tell us what you guys did.
Okay, originally East Africa tended toward environmental solutions. They wanted to eradicate the disease flies, which would be vector transmitted disease. So to kill them, they advocated bush burning and insecticides, but neither of those were effective. So we said that burning the bush would maybe take away resources, especially if they weren't able to control the flames. They would burn farmland. They could also kill animals that were in the forest that they may have been eating. Insecticides that they got into the water and poison people. This would really intense insecticides that we took back then. They just do it with wood, pretty coarse. They made that for anything from homes or more pollution to the fumes of the insecticides again. The benefits we come up with was maybe favorable land for crops. Kept out invasive species, or just made more land for farms.
Good. So it sounds like some negatives and perception here. I mean, if you're kind of tied to the land and then stuff is burning around you, it's probably going to move you around, right? What happens when you move people in a country around, especially rural areas, community to community? Is that just sort of happy, everybody open hands, welcome arms? You create a lot of conflict. There are linguistic differences, cultural differences, religious differences. That's good. So that intervention on the environment can have downstream effects on the population as well. Good. French. French.
So basically, French started off with isolating the sick and giving them diagnosis so that hospitals would be able to treat the infection. But later, they just started giving it to everyone, so they would go to the village, often at some point forcing people to take this medication. And when better medication became available, they did not use it because they thought it was lower cost. And they would go in, give the treatment, and they would come back to check to see if things went. So the cause of this is they started relations with the patients people, obviously. Giving them medication to everyone increased resistance. And they were spreading the disease as they were treating people. The only problem I can think of is they stopped some treatment.
Great. Okay. So mostly, this was. How did you feel about taking the medicine again? Not so good, right? So there were some, your rights were pretty limited. Several rights. Good. Belgians?
Okay, so the Belgian approach was basically quarantining infected individuals in camps. they sort of diagnosed an illness by palpating neck, trying to feel for small glands, which sort of left a little bit of room for misdiagnosis, and you ended up having lots of people in these camps that had to be guarded by soldiers. And so, as from the perspective of the colonized people, sort of the problems there were obviously ones misdiagnosis. If you're not sick and in this camp, it's very likely that you will become sick. And there isn't any mention of really treating these people, just putting them in camps and sort of isolating them from the community. So basically, it's a death sentence if you end up in this camp. It also, in a sort of community sense, it breaks up the community. You're taking people away from their homes and their families. You're also taking people away from villages that they need to maintain and crops that they need to maintain. So that's bad for the people at home, not just the people that are in the camps. As for good things, despite this diagnosis, you could assume if they're testing for a symptom that is actually indicative of sleeping sickness, they are taking away most of the people that do have the sickness. While they're not treating it, they're at least isolating it from any further spread amongst the rest of the population. So there is that. The method isn't great, but it's
Something.
Something, yeah. So I think I agree with all those points. I think it's, what gives you lumps in the neck? I mean, anything, especially in that setting, anything from a virus to malaria, right? And then you're getting thrown in there with a potentially curable disease, right? Good. And then the methods, sounds like there was some power control things there. And probably you were not really had a lot of free will to either accept or refuse those things. There was no informed consent patient documentation that you signed prior to going into those business, right? Good. Portuguese, now tell us what you did.
So Portuguese is a small island in Cape Verde. They brought 600 workers from Angola, all back in 5 years from sickness. The problem population was essentially government action, and convicts were imported from colonies to clear undergrowth and air rehabilitation, drain swamps and fell trees. And then workers would wear black clothes, which the flags were attracted to, and they would go around negotiating cleaning flags. And then all the inhabitants were examined and injected with food also. And the sick were segregated in special camps. And from then on until the 1950s, he was completely very quiet. So we said that benefits were obviously they got rid of the disease for a while, but a lot of negatives being just mass importing people out of their areas, and then draining these swamps where water being drained into, being drained into their like clean drinking water areas, and the also not knowing which is that they found better treatment for it, but they didn't have really problem with it. They just segregate all the sick in their camps.
So you have the problems that come with segregation, right? I mean, moving people together who may or may not want to be together. Quarantine is like that. It's one of those draconian things that hasn't changed in hundreds of years. What do you think about the use of convicts to attract other disease supplies? Got their comeuppance? They got their comeuppance. They got it. What was coming to them? Pretty harsh, right? And what do you think it took to be a convict back in colonial times, right? You look askance at the lady. I mean, it's unclear, right? So there were clear problems, but they did. Why do you think it worked? Mm-hmm. What else? Island. It's an island, right? So all these other places have all these contiguous forests. You can't burn down the whole continent, of forests, right? But you can really contain things on an island. So be happy that we have our biosafety level 4 facility right here on this island. Just keep that in mind. So, good. So people ask me, Dasho, why did you make me go through that whole thing? Why did you make me be a colonial person and then be a colonized person? Well, because motivations are different. right? What do you think motivated those colonial powers, those British, those French, those Belgians, those Portuguese, to do those things to the population? Was it because they wanted to improve the health of that population? Why? They wanted to protect their investment. They wanted to protect their people, right? Their people, their British citizens that were living in those countries. They wanted to protect them from those African diseases and those African people carrying those African diseases, right? And I know that, yeah, go ahead.
It also enforces their territory claim.
Mm-hmm.
If it's one of those situations where it's unsafe and then your people start retreating, you leave your area indefensible.
So there were all of these motivations that were not necessarily altruistic, right? And I make you go through that because you guys are different, right? You guys are not those people. You guys gave me 3 reasons at the beginning of this session. You guys gave me 3 reasons why you wanted to do this type of work, right? And none of it was because I want to extract resources and suppress a population, you know, and none of it was because I want to make money from this enterprise. You know, you said you're interested in learning about what you can learn to serve local communities, improving world health, learning about other healthcare systems, interest in tropical medicine and tropical diseases, research, service, education. You were, the vast majority of you were interested in providing some kind of care. Oh, is that you, Dr. Yusi? We're testing this out. You know, many of you were interested in having some kind of impact on communities that were vulnerable, providing care in the field, mission trips, learning from your peers, cultural learning. Gosh, so many of you guys wanted to learn about different cultures and experience those different cultures, different languages, serve different backgrounds, expand some area of knowledge or skills, and travel. So many of you guys are interested in this because you want to do these things, right? You're not these people. But for better or for worse, that stuff happened. And that's in the DNA, right? That is in the DNA of communities and countries and systems. And so those things happen. Those populations got moved by people who looked like them. And their ancestors, there is ancestral memory to this, right? The more we learn about stress and social stress, the more we understand that it, in fact, can be carried through the genetic code, all right? Through translational modifications and other ways. So both because of reasons of nature and nurture, there is the perception, there can be the perception that you coming from the outside may be a threat. Okay? Even if you're coming under the guise of help. All right? And so the point here is that that's something you're just going to have to live with. I mean, even if you are of darker skin, you're still a gringo. All right? If you come from this country and you speak with this accent and you grew up in this setting, and you're still a gringo, you're still a foreigner. All right? Even if you have parents from that country, sometimes you go back and you're still a foreigner. All right? And that changes the relationships that you can have. So it has to modify your expectations of what you can hope to do in, let's say, short amounts of time. You may not be greeted with open arms, thank you, Savior, for coming and helping me to achieve my full potential. You may be greeted with some hint of suspicion because people who looked like you came with messages of hope and they subjugated and enslaved populations, right? I remember I was listening to a radio, this was right around when Ebola broke out in Liberia. And there was this radio program, and a lady called into the radio, a guy called into the radio host and said, you know, this was around, Liberia was at the early parts of the epidemic, and they didn't want the U.S. military to set up camps there to do Ebola treatment. They didn't want to do Ebola treatment unit camps there. And this guy called up and said, well, that's on them. I mean, why would they turn down this is like free service. We're just giving them something, and honestly, it's on them if they turn it down, right? And it was infuriating to hear that because, you know, can anybody think of a reason why a West African country might not want a Western military presence there, right? Maybe there's been history. Maybe we have intervened in places, and it has had effects downstream on the population. So this is all to say that you have to understand your role in the context here. All right, that you may come with the best of intentions, you may come with all of the good vibes, you may be received with open arms, right? But to do meaningful, lasting, sustained work requires overcoming some of those obstacles that really were not your fault, you know. But even in academics, we still see this. All right, so I'll say this, you know, from working in global health for almost a decade. You know, there are universities from the United States that have set up programs in other countries that are based on research. And they essentially take samples and they take them back to the US and they publish papers and they grow their careers and they leave nothing. Does that sound like colonialism? A little bit? Extraction of a resource for your own personal gain? So we have to reverse that thinking. We have to think differently. And we have to understand that even now in the modern era, there are people who have gone to these countries to extract and to exploit, right? So that's your job to overcome, and it shouldn't make you feel hopeless. It should make you feel like, okay, I just have to change the way that I would engage with the population or the community. And maybe I would ask what would be needed to be done instead of coming with my own ideas, right? So this is the idea that we're trying to convey. So history goes on. I like to skip a couple centuries here because, you know, do that. So the next really big moment that development people point to that made the world it is, aside from colonialism and the sort of post-colonial era, is this, World War II. Some really terrible things happened in World War II, atrocities. You know, 12 million people killed by the Nazis, 6 million of them Jewish, right? We had profound social disruption across all of Europe, which at that time was the economic powerhouse of the world, right? Every big economy was in Europe and was decimated. And it was visible. So the first time you could see photos, people were seeing photos, you know, tens of thousands of miles away of these atrocities. And it really created a moment in history that changed the way that we thought about improving livelihoods. We used to think, well, we just colonize them and then we can make them better. Or, you know, the French especially would say, well, we're going to set up a colony and we're going to make this into like little France because if we could do it, then they could do it, right? Nation states were really at the root of the success of Europe and its demise because that's what led to World War II. So some things started to happen that were really interesting around World War II. We stopped talking about conflicts between nation states and instead talked about haves versus have-nots. Because at this time, Europe was in shambles. The world, especially the Allied powers, were convening to figure out how do we fix Europe. Europe is a powerhouse. If we lose Europe, there is no world economy. There is no trade, and poverty will be rampant across the world. So towards the end of the war, Allied powers began gathering, and they gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire in the mid-1940s, and they started to hatch a plan to create a fund, to create a bank that would fund the reconstruction of Europe. And it was called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Anybody ever heard of that? IBRD? So IBRD ended up becoming the World Bank. Right? So you've heard of the World Bank, right? So these started in the mid-1940s, and it was people coming together and saying, we need to figure out a way to remediate Europe and then govern the world financial system. This is going to need some medicine for the next couple of decades while we fix the world economy. And there was this thing in the United States called the Marshall Plan. Have you guys heard of that? You guys remember the Marshall Plan? It was this grandiose idea that the United States could bankroll a large portion of the reconstruction of Europe, and especially their financial markets. And we did it. It succeeded in a profound short amount of time. Within a decade, economies were back rolling in Europe after being completely laid to waste because of the Second World War. Well, other dialogues were happening that were encouraging dialogues between countries, and that was the United Nations, formed in 1945. This was really an organization that was formed to advocate for peace. They saw, people would see these atrocities, and they said, basically, we can't let this type of genocide, this type of terrible stuff ever happen again. So they formed the United Nations, really to look after the rights of individuals and ensure peace and stability in the world, create a forum where every country could have a dialogue about how to improve the world, right? That was the whole idea behind the United Nations, but it came really from this post-war devastation, both in terms of rights violations and economy. Not soon thereafter, the World Health Organization was formed as sort of a tributary of the United Nations. This was to start talking about the spread of diseases, right? Just like you talked about in colonial medicine, we talked about spreading diseases from the African states to the colonized. You know, they started talking about between countries. Since we're talking about a more international world now, where we're talking about a globalized world and there's going to be more trade, we have to think about how diseases move around. So they created a forum for dialogue around sanitation and hygiene. And then there was the end of colonialism, right? So all of these European powers were completely devastated economically. And they just couldn't maintain these expensive economies in other countries, like in sub-Saharan Africa and in Southern Asia and Southeast Asia. So there was this very rapid de-escalation of colonialism. Literally within 50 years, 40 to 50 years, almost all of the former European colonies were granted independence. So this is rapid. We took hundreds of years to develop these colonies, and then within years we have completely pulled out. How do we feel like that may have left things? Probably unresolved, right? Unresolved. So these guys, and this wasn't like we're going to go to the communities and we're going to involve people. This was the Europeans went to the capital. They locked themselves in a room. They drew maps, right? They drew borders of these countries. They said, here's your borders. Here's your name. Here's your flag. Here's your national anthem. Here's your soccer team. Go. And I don't want to be glib about it, but that's literally the process. And so all of a sudden you had these countries that had been colonies, and the borders had really been disputed. So you could still have culture and language unanimity, but then we drew borders and we split up tribes and we split up communities and we split up languages, and we kind of mushed some of them together that didn't like each other, right? And so all of this is kind of the soup that led to where we are now. So since the end of colonialism, that is what led to what we call the technocratic exercise of development. This is people, like you guys who are studying why these problems happen and what you can do about them. And there have been a lot of people who have, way smarter than me, who have tried to think about how to fix this problem. Because those countries were poor and they stayed poor. In most cases, they were not able to achieve the dreams, right? They were not able to achieve the full potential. Or some did, but most didn't, right? So there was debates about whether it's better to have a government leading the strategy versus communities, right? We initially thought, hey, we're nation states, we want governments to do it. And, you give governments big block grants without estimates of accountability, probably not going to get spent very well, right? So that encouraged dialogue. Well, we got to get people participating from the community and how to do these interventions, how to do these types of programs. Then most of it, which we're going to go into in the next module, all this funding was coming from resource-rich countries for resource-poor ones. That creates a power dynamic, and in many cases, it was sort of reinforcing some of the colonial ties. You will find that the British fund development programs extensively in their former colonies. The French fund development programs extensively in their former colonies. And some of that is so they can maintain resource connections, right? So then Cold War got in the way. The Russians, us, Cuba, so on, we started to actually fight our wars in these countries, especially on an economic basis. And then all of that got complicated by the global financial crisis in 2008, where we were giving aid and we were supporting aid programs, and then everybody got gun shy and decided, nope, we don't want to support aid anymore, we've got to focus inwards. Why can't they take care of themselves, right? So all of that is to say that's where we are, okay? That's where we ended up. So I want to take a few minutes to do this. This is okay? 6:30. Nope, we're going to skip it. I have a thing on development metrics, all right? This is super important. It'll be in Blackboard. We have a kind of an activity around it. Different ways to measure development, and kind of unpacking what they are so you understand them. Please take a look at them in Blackboard because they're going to come back to haunt us throughout the course. We're going to be using some of this terminology in a way that I hope you'll understand at that point. So what I want to really move on to is this, because this is the fun part. All right, this is crafts. You've been wondering, Dasha, we're not kindergartners. Why do you have all the arts and crafts stuff on the table? Well, I am a kindergartner at heart, okay? And so I want you to synthesize in your mind. We've talked about a lot of stuff today. We talked about global health definitions. We talked about development and what that is. We talked about how we got there. We talked about Fernando and what he needs to be able to realize his potential. We talked about your motivations to engage in this. And so what I want you to do is work and take about 10 minutes. Do a nice project. Okay, a craft project. You pick one person from your team to take whatever you want to your table. And I want you to put something together that really emphasizes what development is and what we need to achieve our full potential. All right? So you can be as creative or as not creative as you want. You can draw the whole thing or you can make it 3D. But that's what I want you to do. And then you're going to walk us all through it. Someone from your group is going to say, this is this and this is that. And we're going to learn. Okay? Good? We good with crafts? We all with crafts? All right. Go for it. One representative. Don't all rush the table.
Okay. I know. I feel like I should have a better grip on this than I do.
Someone's going to have to come. Get the stuff. Charts. Get the stuff. Oh, you're making a plan.
You know what I'm talking about. Those are literally that bell on one table can determine the majority of your population you can decline because the mid-range section goes containing at the bottom you see.
I don't have enough hands.
You can make a crafty craft. I'm telling you, they're pretty crafts.
So Carolyn was saying that she couldn't. She said that when we lived in Jordan, we didn't have any of this. Right. This is just that people have participation. They're like, that we
But it doesn't say like sections that we could do each kind of that makes sense. Like if we fold it in the Korean style, it'll stand by itself for one. And then it gives us two sections where it can grow. Like you can do the entire community and it's free. Right? That's really cool. I can't remember what those maps are. That's the graph. That is the graph. That tells you what if your nation is going up or going down. Yes. But that assessment of going up, like migration assessment, you're actually on the but you have to look. It's big. But we do have that produce so they could change the bell curve.
I'm sorry, like Oh, so
So you have like a section over here, a section over there, and they all do it. In turn, you have a base section, side sections. It's self-standing.
How's Jessica? What's up? Oh,
Streets. She wants a feather.
What about this?
Yeah, we can do that too.
You have like C on the side.
Probably have three flowers. Yeah, that's down for that. Yeah. You obviously know the main target is in decline. I capture mountain. We want like a yellow
Represents our soul, right?
Perfect. Good, man. Awesome. Awesome.
That's good.
Yeah. It's like. Yeah.
This is what you say to ourselves.
So we need a skyline. We could do a skyline, a city skyline. I'll take care of that. And then on the other side.
we did it.
What is development?
Actually, get more scissors to figure it out. Yeah. That. Like city skyline? Safety cities. You could have cut it like once. I should have done that. You can also divide it. You can only like cut out sections. Are you doing development or not development?
I'm doing development strategy.
Okay. I'm doing non-development skyline.
I'm gonna like put holes in it.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. Sorry. I was just like, what?
Word.
Not really. It's hard to say what about the.
I'm working on the skyline.
Yeah, you know.
all right, a couple more minutes.
Just a couple minutes, guys.
Dude, we seriously have to do the entire craft in a couple minutes. It's not gonna work. Going on the fly.
Just start
These can be
We're very poor
abstract.
in the forward one here. So that is that's what happens.
This one,
Not an abundance of resources. What do
Do you want that?
we just sharpened two
kind of looks like portable
For the balls?
It does.
Ooh, we can do this for cars. Here you go.
Oh,
Yes, that was.
oh, no. Oh, sorry. I don't know if I did.
Yes, nothing says people like balls. We ditched.
I'll make the.
We have a stick, a glue stick. Is there a glue stick?
There's tape.
Tape. I've got tape. Oh, yeah, that's cool. We do. We want it. I've got black. Oh, he's got my season Brad. I'm just gonna that is gonna be cool. Dude, if you cut off, leave it up right here. That's just am I right?
You were right.
Wait, you just made two skylines of this. That's why you never cut out a space for you know, skyline.
It's kind of visual.
Right, I'm gonna just.
Yes. First thing I see, Lion King. Hey, look at the bright side. As long as you got the Sam Square in your group, you at least keep interest. Actually, you Sam Square? Is that what you don't understand that? Yeah, we can be Sam too. Just shake some of the other Sam.
But I had some back
There's just gonna be a lot of Is that like, are we getting into like meta?
All right, guys, last minute.
Take one, take one. Oh, come on. Don't throw that. I'm picking up what you were putting down. People are hunting elephants. Are we illegitimately believing that? Perfect. These people are hunting elephants so they can actually sustain themselves. Or maybe they're following the elephants. Elephants are really good at finding water. They're traveling with the elephants to find water. Dude, throw the cars on there. That's perfect, yeah. That's how real cars work.
All right, who's most ready? You guys seem ready. You guys seem ready. Okay, so the deal is you gotta come to the front.
All of us?
No. You can select one person who can, unless it's a two-person job to carry it. Like, come on up here and show us all what you did, what it means. Or if it's too hard to move it, then just stand up there and we can all watch you.
Final touches. Hold on. Building up the anticipation.
Yeah. Bated breath. Okay.
It's very symbolic.
Very. This is an abstract, symbolic deal. That's fine. Maybe that's good. Okay. Here we go. So teach us.
Okay. So here we are. This is our infrastructure. It's not necessarily symbolic of any particular thing, just structure. Yes. Okay. The feather is the government, like a or Harry Potter. This is a braided. What are the pipe cleaners? Braided pipe cleaners for support. So when you have multiple people and you're braided together, support. Yeah. And then the dollar sign. Ready. And this is a pink Red Cross for health. And then also we have broccoli here. Broccoli for nutrition and things like that. And then this is our brain because of education, and you have to, that's the source of education there. And then government.
Beautiful. All right, who's next? You guys look, this looks very sturdy and robust.
So we've also got the money sign here. So we've got water, because we need clean water. Everybody can be healthy, so help, or also, sort of non-specific religious descriptor, cross or whatever you might be into. We've got this guy, he's military, because as we saw, the non-developed nations were essentially at the mercy of the developed nations, so the developed nation will be able to defend themselves peer or peer come in and take on their stuff. And then here's overall, just kind of, we've got a panda who's developing from, just one white pom-pom into several. And so it's just kind of an overview for how development works. You start with a little panda.
I love that. Love that. Okay, let's go here. How are we doing? Are we able to aim? You don't have to totally do it 90 degrees.
Yeah, we're not gonna angle it, but
Can everybody see?
Or you can take the giraffe off and show them.
yeah.
No, we can't. The giraffe is central, clearly.
Yeah, so.
You guys see okay?
Yeah, so we talked about how development, a big part of it is like the distribution of wealth and health and resources and all that sort of stuff. So we have all of our little people evenly distributed among shelter, healthy government, technology and wealth, water, resources and food, environment, and then I've always heard healthy as a giraffe, but apparently wellness is never
All right.
And all of our people are connected.
Yes, they're all connected.
We're all interconnected.
They are.
So they can help each
Oh,
other.
healthy, the horse is healthy as no, it's not.
You're getting a giraffe
I like giraffe.
advertising.
Well, it's healthy as a giraffe.
Yeah, I love it. I'll take it.
Okay.
Good job, guys. All right. Come on, guys. Show us what this is quite elaborate.
So it's not. So we did, oops. Guess we're not gonna move with this. So we did a double-edged sword. We showed the kind of, we did the developed side on one, kind of like what you would see in those certain areas, like the differences between like certain predominant mythology, like the kind of area that they live in, the economic status that they provided you. And then we did kind of like a lesser developed situation where you have kind of like your limited resources, the different types of animals that you would see, and then we put the polar bear on the side of the zoo. And then the puffballs are people, and there will be some on this side and small on this side. And then the elephant is guiding the little tribal people to water because they don't have access to readily available resources, so they have to use different means of finding them. And then you can see the wine and grind of the modern society on the other side. It's like the logo there. And then we tried to make the heart beat shape, but it's kind of structurally unsound. So we did our best.
That's really good. Guys, great work. Good projects. All right. We can't always be left brainers, guys. We have to use the right brain. Give the left brain a rest. That is, it seems like a crazy exercise, but it gets you kind of thinking a little bit differently about how you want to express these ideas. And sometimes we don't have words for them, so we have pictures. I love it. Come on, baby. Okay, so the whole kind of synopsis of all of this, we really like this guy, Amartya Sen. He's a Nobel laureate of really Bengal descent, who came up in the UK, and he studied, his big claim to fame, this guy is a Nobel economics laureate. His whole thing was he studied the Bengali famine of the 1940s. And what he put forth in his treatise, his grand, treatise, was that, in fact, famine was, in that setting, not about whether there was not enough food. It was about the distribution of food. So there was plenty of food. It just was concentrated in the elites and was not available to those with no resources. So from this, he said, in order to achieve full potential, what you really need, what we're really talking about here is freedoms. All right, freedoms to be educated, the freedoms and the capabilities to be healthy, the capability to participate in a democratic process, the capability to go to school without risk of losing your life. And so at the crux of this was the idea that the usefulness of the wealth is not the wealth. It's not just having the money. It's what that allows a society, a country, an individual to do. So he came up with this treatise that was the development as freedom. And it's a great book. I won't say it's a page turner. All right, it's thick because this guy writes like an economist, but it's actually not a bad read. And so he talked about human capability, that this is all what we're all about, whether we're in health professions, law, engineering, social sciences, economics, whatever have you, and we're talking about problems that face society today. It's really, the common language is capabilities. And if we can really agree on capabilities, that we need to foment or encourage certain capabilities, then we have a much easier time agreeing with each other. So it culminates with this. What does Fernando need to be healthy? You've done great pictoramas of it. You've talked a lot about what it takes, all right? And it's not just about having the hospital, and it's not just about having the vaccination. It's about having all those things that you guys talked about. Because if we are going to expect for him to be healthy, physically, socially, mentally, and free of disease, it's not just about whether he can go to the hospital or to the clinic, right? So really, global health is an offshoot of development. Global health, I want you guys to kind of think of those things as more or less transferable. And so, the assignment, for those who are going to do the assignment, take a look at the literature or the news, and I want you to find a real-world article that pertains to international aid and your profession. All right, so our next topic is international aid. We'll be talking about the international aid structure, humanitarian assistance versus development aid. But find something that concerns either humanitarian assistance or development aid that concerns your profession, and bring it to class next month. I believe there's also a place to upload it on Blackboard. And also think about, for this session, why development matters. Why is it good for you to know some of this stuff? Why is it good for us to have spent time plundering history to learn about how we're going to apply those things in our profession? Excuse me. So, end there. Any questions, comments, concerns? Are we okay? We stayed awake? Yeah. Yes. Yes, it will. Right, Brad?
It's already up there.
It's already up there. And you can leave those placards, yeah. It'll take me more than one sesh to get everybody's names. And even then, I can't promise. And just go ahead and leave your craft projects, and we'll see you next time.
Make sure you sign it on your way out. That's how I come for it.
Hey, Brad, you want me to push stop recording?
You can stop recording. Yeah.